not too clear on exactly when. I'm thinking that probably sometime between about November 84 and February 85, because the thing that I do remember is that I was in my second year of my university course, and so that kind of puts an early limit of about October 84. And I also remember that it was winter, so that gives us a span of about 3 months. If I had to really guess at which month it was, I would probably say December or so of 84. So, but around that sort of time is when things happened. I was trying to analyse what happened in club passing patterns to try and work out why certain throws would work and others wouldn't. I mean, just from a common sense point of view, the ones that didn't work because clubs collided. But you know, how could one predict the way in which a new throw would work or not? So I started with the simpler idea of just trying to sketch a 3-ball juggling pattern with 2 hands. So I had time running down the page. The 2 hands were just represented by 2 straight lines, because although the hands do move, I wasn't interested in that. I was only trying to encapsulate the movement of the balls and the timing variations. So a throw from the left, from say the right hand to the left, just looked like a straight line. Now, obviously, when you juggle, there's a certain amount of time when the hand is empty, but that wasn't one of the things I was interested in. So I just ignored that and set the restriction that the hand was never empty. Really, I compressed that interval of time down to nothing, so that the next ball came out immediately as the first one arrived, and there was no. I mean, if you were to magnify this area of the diagram, you'd see a ball coming out before the other ball went in. But it greatly simplified things if I just ignored that, and so a 3-ball juggling pattern ended up looking like this. And because that sets a natural tempo, left-right rhythm, I also put in the rungs of the ladder effectively to indicate the time, the sort of standard time interval of a throw. And so this was my 3-ball juggling pattern. And strangely, I thought, well, there's no exciting variations you can do on that. You're just stuck with one wiggly line going down the page. So I immediately scrapped that idea and moved on to 4 balls. And so here's my 4-ball version. So this was probably the second diagram I ever drew. It was obvious to me that ignoring the time for which the hand is empty, if you juggle at the same rhythm, the 4-ball throws spend twice as long in the air, because obviously you have to have room for this extra ball in the pattern. The question that sprung to mind was, what would happen if you took 2 particular ones of these throws, say this throw here and this throw here. Oh dear. And can you still see that? 2 particular consecutive throws, one from the right and one from the left. These are their points of departure and these are their points of arrival. I thought, well, what would happen if you swapped over their points of arrival, which is it's a simple thing to try and do. What actually happens? If I just sketch out that relevant part of the picture, this throw, instead of arriving here, now arrives at the arrival point of the other throw, and vice versa. So already I had something that looked a little bit exciting and different. The rest of the juggling pattern here is just an ordinary 4 balls. I thought, what would happen if you instead replaced the entire pattern with just this little section here? And I realized that you'd get something which was familiar to me, because I could already do that pattern, which was 5-3. But I think the reason that I never saw the need to try and capture 5-3 in a diagram was because it was sufficiently simple that I could see what was going on without having to sketch it. But now I wanted to try and turn 5-3 into a symmetrical pattern. And of course the first point that you can do the next 5 height throw would be here. And all you need is one linking 4 to join the two sections together. Then I just repeated the diagram going down the page, and lo and behold, I had some completely new pattern that I had never juggled before and never seen anybody do, and was incredibly intriguing, but immediately very difficult to juggle because it involved such a mix of throw heights, which now is commonplace and regarded as easy, but at the time I think it was more difficult to wrap one's head around the combination of throw heights rather than actually physically do them. And so it was because we didn't yet have that structure developed in our brains that made them at the outset rather hard to learn. And it's only when you find yourself in a context where everyone can do them and regard basic patterns such as this as easy that it becomes a lot easier to learn. It was certainly something that I had never seen, and the reason that it's a less obvious choice when you don't have a notation to work it out. Up till the point of Siteswaps, I think that the patterns people tended to regard as interesting were ones that had visual appeal in the sense that you could easily grasp what was going on in the pattern. So 5-3 was a much more obvious choice than 5-3-4, simply because you can see just by looking at it what the hands have to do. Whereas until 5-3-4 was analysed, it took just the first time you saw it, you couldn't really see what was going on. So I don't think I think that was maybe the reason why it didn't catch on so immediately. Armed with these pictures, I then went to my friend Adam Chalcraft and showed the diagrams to him, and he was very intrigued, and we had a little discussion about them to try and see where we could take the idea. And at that stage it was just you know, an idea that we were mulling over in our heads for a little while. I think a few days later Colin Wright came to me showing me these diagrams, saying, "Have you seen Adam's juggling diagrams?" And he showed me then exactly the same diagrams that I'd just shown to Adam, and, and I said, "Oh, they're Adam's diagrams, are they?" So, but anyway, that's how the three of us got together on the common idea. I showed Adam the pictures, and then he showed the same to Colin, and then Colin, Adam, and I all started talking about it. Now, there was at some point an additional member of the group that joined the discussions, and his name was Jim Mellor, or James Mellor. But since then, or since we left university, nobody has really been able to get in touch with him, so we don't know what happened to him. And to be honest, none of us remembers what contribution he had to the conversations, or you know, whether he was an active participant or just somebody interested to hear what we had to say. But he was definitely involved somehow or other. So we had these ideas going around for probably a few weeks, and at some point the numbers obviously came into the picture. Now I don't really know between Adam and Colin who came up with the numbers. I suspect it was Colin. He'll probably have ideas of his own on it, but I was really just making approving noises of what they had to say at that point. So I can't take any of the credit for actually inventing the notation. But after that, it was then a matter of trying to assign meanings to the 2, 1, and 0 height throws, and then we pretty much had the whole picture. Because we started with variations like 5-3-4, and then maybe went back a step to 3 balls to see what could be done with 3 balls. As soon as you start adding in higher throws into 3 balls, then naturally a 2 will appear in the sequence, or a 1 or a 0. And then we thought, well, we know what it means to throw a ball to height 3 or height 4, but what do the lower numbers mean? And it took a while for those to get worked out. We called it the Cambridge notation for juggling, which obviously was not a name that caught on very easily, so it's no wonder that it's not called that anymore. I'd never seen anybody do it at the time, so and I remember a European convention where yourself, Max Oddball, and Haggis MacLeod sat in front of me in a little audience, watching me attempt to do this pattern, which I could do it for a few throws at that point, and you sat and watched me for about half an hour trying to work out what was going on. And Haggis kept asking me whether there were any multiplex throws in the pattern, and because it was a difficult one to actually follow visually at the time, when there was no reference against which to see it.
Desert Island Siteswaps with Mike Dick today.
Right, and how many balls would I be allowed to take to this desert island?
X.
Right. Well, obviously 5-3-4, because that was the one that started the whole thing. I think the other one that got me excited when I came across it was the 6x4 pattern, which was sort of an accident, because I at the time was trying to learn how to do 6-7-2 or 7-2-6, and it was only because my hands couldn't do it. They tended to automatically shift into a synchronous throw mode that pattern was born. And I think it's only at that point that I realised how much unexplored potential there was for synchronous patterns as well. And not many people were doing synchronous patterns beyond the obvious ones that can be done without any system of notation. Don't ask me that.
How dare you? Leave my house immediately.
No, that's an interesting question. Well, I don't think that that there's any right or wrong way to describe a pattern, and the Siteswap notation obviously only is only interested in one aspect of juggling, and that's what happens when you permute the landing times of the balls that you throw, and so there would, the diagram is obviously another way of describing the same thing, and there's nothing really to say that one system is better than any other, or that, and obviously Siteswaps doesn't encompass all that you'd want to annotate about a juggling pattern. But as to whether you've actually created something or just discovered, I think it's probably more the case that that you've discovered something, because the juggling pattern is really a physical manifestation of a more abstract mathematical concept, and I suppose the question is then whether the mathematical structures are there all along, or to be discovered, or whether you create those. And the same is true that a notation system only captures certain aspects that you're interested in of an abstract idea. So I suppose it could be argued that it's a bit of both.
No, it's a good answer.
In short, I have no idea.
I don't know if any of us do.
Was invented in order to try and answer a question, which was what happens if you take Mills mess, just 3-ball Mills mess, and you reverse it in time. Because I couldn't, in my mind, figure out whether you'd get the same as Mills mess or whether you'd get a completely new pattern. And so I came up with the idea of trying to annotate the states in which the hands naturally end up. Because the thing about Mills mess is that it seemed to me to have a particular innate logic to it that guided the hands through the pattern. And so if there was a backwards version that differed from the forwards version, why had nobody discovered it? Was it somehow less natural to do? So I thought of the idea of writing down the normal state in which the hands find themselves when you're juggling is uncrossed. So I would have the uncrossed state annotated with the letter U, and then of course when you juggle you alternate between left and right throws in a normal asynchronous pattern. I would have uncrossed with a little L and uncrossed with a little R to denote the two states in which you're about to throw with the left hand or you're about to throw with the right hand. Another convention would be that you could annotate which hand has just thrown, but it's an arbitrary choice, so I chose which hand is about to throw next. And in a normal juggling pattern, you simply alternate backwards and forwards between these two states. And so you get that as a little state diagram of your ordinary juggling pattern. And this is not specific to any Siteswap. You could apply any pattern to this. It just denotes the progress of the hands through the pattern. Now, I also added, this is where the diagram gets a little bit more cluttered. I added a couple more arrows with a bar next to each of the arrows, so that in our Cambridge version of the notation, we used, of the Siteswap notation, we used a bar over a number to represent an outside throw. So of course this now captures the possibility of doing outside throws, so it could be a reverse cascade if you take only the outside throws, or it could be a half shower if you take an outside throw one way and an inside throw the other way, and so on. Now for Mills mess, every cycle through the pattern your hands cross and uncross, sometimes with the left hand on top, sometimes with the right hand on top. So I added some new states, and up here we can think of the states in which, for example, the right hand is on top, in which case I call them capital R for right hand being on top. And then of course you've got this is really two states, because either the left hand has just thrown or the right hand has just thrown. So of course we had the little letters R and L. Now I put them in the opposite way round from the uncrossed states, because I wanted to not clutter the diagram up too much, and with alternating throws you'll always move from a little L state to a little R state, because the throws alternate. So you can take this route here, which will take you from an uncrossed state where the left hand is about to throw to a cross state where the right hand is on top. And of course you can come back again. And the same thing with this side. We've got two routes we can take. Now going between these two states corresponds to juggling in a configuration where the right hand always stays on top. So you can think of just juggling with your hands crossed. You can alternate back and forward between these two states, and the same thing applies here, where you can do outside or inside throws. So again, I had arrows with bars going both ways. I'm going to ignore for now whether or not these arrows have bars, so I'll come back to that. And of course, you've got exactly the same thing with the left hand being on top, down here. So it's getting a bit convoluted, but there is a sense to it all because it did lead somewhere. Now, since I did this notation, I've seen people compress the arrows. For example, Colin Wright and Andrew Lipson compress the arrows into a slightly more succinct format. But this is the way it looked originally when I sketched it out. The logic of Mills' mess to me was that when you throw from the crossed position, it's the throwing action, it's the exchange, the throw and release that is the reason for wanting to move your hand over. So when you uncross the hands, the natural tendency is for an ordinary inside throw to uncross the hands, and it's the performing of the action of an ordinary inside throw. If the ball is coming down far enough away, that makes you want to uncross your hands. Similarly, if you're doing from an uncrossed position an ordinary outside throw, if the ball that's coming down is far enough across, it will make you cross your hands. So this to me seemed to be the logic that brought Mills' mess into existence and was the thing that I was trying to capture in this diagram. So that gives you a restriction, which is that when you go from an uncrossed state to a crossed state, you can only do an outside throw because it's the outside throw that causes the crossing. And similarly, it's an ordinary inside throw that causes the uncrossing. So in my diagram, going from uncrossed to crossed had to be an outside throw with a bar, and going from crossed to uncrossed had to be an ordinary throw. A bar there, a bar there, and a bar there. So it looks a bit messy, but Mills' mess then turned out to be a progression around all 6 states. So you'd go from uncrossed state to a crossed state with the left hand on top. Then the right hand does an ordinary inside throw to keep the hands crossed. The left hand makes an ordinary throw to uncross the hands. The right hand makes an outside throw to cross the hands. The left hand makes an ordinary throw to keep the hands crossed, and then the right hand makes an ordinary throw to uncross the hands. So in this version, Mills' mess is an anti-clockwise progression around all 6 states. I have a feeling that the original diagram was actually the other way around, so it was a clockwise, but it's obviously equivalent. And at this point, I think I was able to figure out the answer to my question, because you can reason what happens to the diagram if you reverse time, because in each case an inside throw becomes an outside throw. A state with the right hand about to throw becomes a state where the left hand has just thrown. So if you reverse time, that becomes a state where the left hand is about to throw, and so on. And so that diagram transforms into another diagram, or at least the subset of the pathways representing Mills' mess transforms into a different diagram. If you then try and match that up with the original, you find that it's actually the same. Funnily enough, it's not. You might imagine that it would be a circuit around in the opposite direction. It turns out to be a circuit in the same direction, but taking the other alternative path when you step from a cross state to a cross state. So it's almost the same. The only difference being that when you're in the cross state, instead of doing an inside throw, you do an outside throw. And thus reverse Mills' mess was born, and it did feel a little bit less natural than ordinary Mills' mess, and I think that's why it wasn't discovered so easily.
And so what happens if you go around the other way?
If you go around the other way, good question. You, you get an even less natural pattern in which instead of the outside throw crossing you above, the outside throw crosses you below. And I think the reason that's less natural is because when you make a throw, your hand is going up, so it feels like it wants to cross over the top, whereas you have to do that little reach underneath. And then you get the time reversal of that, which is yet again less natural. So, but the disadvantage, of course, is that to somebody who doesn't really, is not overly familiar with Mills Mess, they all look exactly the same. So just do the best one. The other things that came out of this were the question of what happens if you take different paths other than a circuit round all 6 states. For example, we know what happens if you just bounce back and forward between 2 states. You just get, in this case, ordinary juggling, in this case, juggling with the hands crossed constantly, and so on. But you can also take shorter paths, like a circuit of 4, would correspond to a kind of a windmilling type pattern, where you go between uncrossed and only one hand ever being crossed above. I mean, I remember seeing that done before this diagram ever came into existence, and so that was another pattern that could be captured by this. And then, of course, there was the question of what happens when you apply a different siteswap pattern to a sequence of transitions. And then, of course, it became very interesting because one of the things I looked at first was the Rubinstein's revenge pattern. And I found that you could very easily describe it with a slight distortion of the timing of the pattern. You could very easily take the siteswap 5, 2, 2, 3, 3, add in some transitions, and you would get Rubinstein's revenge, or at least a version without the sort of inverted hand that is normally done in that pattern. But that managed to capture that fairly well, except I thought it's a little bit cumbersome to have to attach this diagram to any pattern, because it's obviously very convoluted and difficult to read. And I thought, I wonder if there's a much more succinct notation in the same way that the ladder diagrams become numbers. Can you do the same thing with this picture and convert it into just a letters and numbers notation system? So I had the idea that you could take, by seeing whether a throw leaves your hands uncrossed, or whether the throwing hand moves above or the throwing hand moves below, you've really got 3 different types of throw. And of course the uncrossed throw just corresponds to an ordinary number in siteswaps. The transition, or the throw that leaves you in a state where the throwing hand is above, I attached a little A for above, to the siteswap number. And a throw for which the throwing hand finishes below, I attached a little B. Mills Mess then becomes 3 bar above, 3 below. And that was the nice. Once I'd seen the little twiddle in the Rubinstein's pattern as a siteswap, I thought, well, what happens if you isolate just that twiddle, which is really the 5-2-2 part? And I realized that you could get a very interesting pattern if you effectively did 5-2-2 as a Mills Mess. And that worked out to be the Mike's Mess pattern, or the pattern that people refer to seemingly as Mike's Mess. Well, no, that's a valid point. I've heard people express their opinion to want to do that. And again, it goes back to the question of what are you trying to encapsulate in a certain notation? Because a notation, if it becomes overly complicated, to try and incorporate too many ideas all at once, I think it becomes less useful, because it's harder to focus on what you're trying to use it to accomplish. But the other point about adding transitions from states that don't have arrows here, this was only intending to capture the particular logic that Mills-Mess seems to have in one's hands. To add in transitions where you move effectively multiple states in one go, obviously your hands can do that because you might have a very quick reversal or something like that. But in some sense that feels less natural than what the Mills-Mess movements are all about. But also, if you really want a quick full reversal from, say, right hand crossed above to left hand crossed above, you can still accomplish it using single transitions in this diagram by changing the siteswap pattern, by adding a longer throw, for example, a 5-2-2. And so in a way you can still describe the patterns that you want to, albeit with a slightly different timing. I mean, there are several patterns anyway where you're not strictly doing an even tempo siteswap. You try and achieve a certain effect, which ends up naturally being a distortion of a siteswap.